Welcome back to ILTV on the Hour. I'm Kalip David, coming to you live from Israel with the top headlines coming out of this region and beyond. Well, it's currently 7 a.m. in New York City. It's 2 p.m. here in Israel. Here are the latest developments. The confrontation between Washington and Tehran is escalating sharply, with a third straight night of U.S. strikes on Iran, new threats against its nuclear program, and growing concern here in Israel that the conflict could spill over. The U.S. military continues to target Iranian military capabilities, while Tehran retaliated with attacks on Bahrain and 2 Emirati oil tankers, killing 1 crew member and wounding 8 others. U.S. Central Command says American forces completed a 5-hour operation overnight, targeting Iranian coastal defenses, missile and drone sites, and naval facilities at Bushehr, Bandar Abbas, and other locations. The Pentagon says the strikes were designed to further degrade Iran's ability to attack commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, adding that U.S. forces remain vigilant, lethal, and ready. The IRGC accused the U.S. of encouraging ships to use what it called an illegal shipping route, warning that any vessel cooperating with Washington could become a target. Now, President Trump says the U.S. is striking Iran very hard and indicated that the deeply buried Pickaxe nuclear facility could be the next target, saying it may soon receive a nice big fat shot. But Trump added that he still believes the U.S. can reach agreement with Iran.
We're hitting them very heavy tonight, as you know. We have tremendous amounts of ammunition. We have numbers that we haven't had in years. And we're hitting them very hard, and it'll continue, and we'll see what happens. But we're knocking out all of their offensive capability, and we're controlling the straits. We're putting the blockade back. And it's a blockade not for anybody but Iran. In other words, anybody doing business with Iran can't go through. Everyone else will be able to go through. So it's a blockade. It's a very strong blockade. The blockade was probably more effective even than hitting them, but I think the combination is the thing that really does it.
But do you think a deal is still possible? Do you think they'll return to that?
Yeah, I think a deal is possible, sure, I do.
Well, as part of the campaign, the U.S. military has released footage of what it says was the first ever combat use of a suicide drone boat against an Iranian target. CENTCOM said the explosive-laden unmanned surface vehicle was used to strike an Iranian submarine and ship maintenance facility as part of its latest campaign to degrade Tehran's ability to threaten commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the attack forming part of a broader operation targeting Iranian naval, missile, drone, and air defense capabilities as the U.S. moves to keep the strait open. Meanwhile, new details have been revealed of an alleged scheme by Israel's Mossad to recruit former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as part of a secret plan to help topple the Islamic regime. Now, these extraordinary claims have not been confirmed by Israel, which has declined to comment. The New York Times, citing U.S. officials and sources familiar with the operation, reports that the Mossad maintained secret contacts with former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad over several years as part of an effort to install him as Iran's next leader. Now, the report says the operation included at least 2 covert meetings between Ahmadinejad and then Mossad chief David Barnea in Hungary. The rector of Ludovika University in Budapest told the Times that he was asked by the Hungarian government to invite Ahmadinejad to a conference on climate change as cover to arrange the meetings between him and Barnea. Ahmadinejad, once known for his Holocaust denial and repeated claims for Israel's destruction, had later fallen out with Iran's ruling establishment after he was repeatedly barred from running again for the presidency. The one-time hardliner is said to have come to believe that Iran should move closer to the West, providing an opening for the Mossad to contact him. Now, according to the Times report, Ahmadinejad was just one part of a broader plan that involved wiping out Iran's current leadership and destabilizing the regime by arming Kurdish rebels to stage an uprising. After the airstrike that killed the supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei and other top officials, Israeli agents in Iran reportedly attempted to extract Ahmadinejad from his closely guarded compound and bring him to a safe house. But the plan ultimately failed when Ahmadinejad backed down from participating. According to some reports, he is now under house arrest or in the custody of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps over the alleged contacts with Israel. The only public sighting of him in recent months was at last week's funeral for the Ayatollah Khamenei. Ahmadinejad's office today denied the report, releasing a statement saying, "We categorically reject all the completely false allegations promoted by the New York Times, as well as the claims that he is currently under house arrest." And back here in politics, Israel's Knesset has passed one of the most controversial laws of the government's term, enshrining Torah study as a fundamental value in Israel's basic laws. This just days before Parliament goes into recess ahead of October elections. The bill passed its final readings by a vote of 63 to 52 after weeks of coalition tensions with the ultra-Orthodox parties. Now, the new basic law declares Torah study a foundational value of the state, giving it constitutional status. Supporters say the measures protects a core Jewish value. Critics argue it would strengthen further legal efforts to preserve military service exemptions for yeshiva students, despite the IDF's continuing manpower shortage. Now, the vote came despite a sharp warning from IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, who in a public letter to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Israel Katz argued that the draft exemption legislation would damage fairness, harm morale, and undermine the military during wartime. Within hours of the law's passage, the Movement for Quality Government petitioned the Kai Court of Justice, arguing the law is attempting to entrench Haredi draft exemptions in Israel's basic laws, despite previous court rulings requiring ultra-Orthodox men to serve in the IDF. Opposition leaders vow to repeal the law if they win in the October 27th elections. And the Trump administration is escalating its confrontation with the International Criminal Court, launching a new campaign to isolate the Hague-based tribunal following its decision to pursue Israeli and U.S. officials. The White House announced a sweeping effort to dismantle the ICC, calling the body a threat to U.S. sovereignty and a danger to democratic allies such as Israel. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Washington is launching a global campaign to isolate the court, Rubio declaring that countries benefiting from American security should not support an institution that targets the U.S. and its allies, adding the administration will dismantle the ICC, quote, brick by brick, if necessary. Among the range of measures the U.S. is considering, including additional sanctions, visa restrictions, travel bans on ICC officials, and diplomatic pressure on other countries to withdraw their support for the court. Of course, the ICC has issued arrest warrants for Prime Minister Netanyahu, former Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, over alleged war crimes in Gaza. Neither the U.S. nor Israel are members of the ICC. Both governments have rejected its claim of jurisdiction. And moving on, the European Union, has unveiled a $1 billion plan to help rebuild Gaza, even as Israel continues to insist that any long-term reconstruction must not allow Hamas to rearm or return to power. The European Commission and more than a dozen donor nations has launched a nearly $1 billion initiative to support Gaza's recovery following the war. The Team Gaza initiative will fund projects including the restoration of water and sanitation systems, debris removal, and the rebuilding of healthcare infrastructure. The agreement was signed in Brussels by the Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Mustafa, by European officials and representatives from countries including Britain, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain. The World Bank and the European Investment Bank are also participating, with Australia and Canada expected to join. Israel has repeatedly stressed that reconstruction must be tied to the complete dismantling of Hamas's capabilities, preventing the diversion of international aid, and ensuring that Gaza cannot again be used as a base for terror attacks against Israel. Now, the UN estimates rebuilding Gaza could cost as much as $70 billion, making international oversight of future aid a central Israel in any post-war settlement.
Together, we have gathered a preliminary early recovery package worth nearly €900 million to transfer in dollars $1 billion. This includes a proposed amount of $257 million from the European Commission and the European Investment Bank.
Our discussions also reaffirmed the urgent necessity of advancing a comprehensive recovery program leading to the full reconstruction of the war-ravaged Gaza Strip. Our people should not be left without progress on recovery. But to be honest with you, not much will happen until Israeli withdrawal from Palestinian areas. If that doesn't happen, the problem will remain. And
there we go.
even if the money is there, not much will progress.
Not much progress. Well, let's get back to the latest on Iran and other security news. Joining us now is Professor Kobi Mikhail. He's a senior researcher at the INS and Misgav Institutes. Professor Mikhail, thank you for joining us. A lot to discuss on Iran, but I do have to start by asking you about this New York Times report about a Mossad plan to put Mahmoud Ahmadinejad as the head of Iran. A lot of skepticism when this was first revealed in general. I think it was a couple of months, really a month ago, but the New York Times coming out with some real details now about this plan. Does it seem plausible to you that this actually was attempted?
Yes, and I'm asking myself who eventually has a reason to leak it out. And I think that the answer is clear. This is not from Israeli resources. This is from American resources. And I assume that the CIA is behind that because the CIA is running from its own responsibility. The CIA was deeply connected to this operation. They were involved in not only in the details, but in the performance as well, mainly when it came to the Kurds. They were in the picture, they supported the idea, they believed in the idea, and only when President Erdogan came with his rejection about the Kurds and President Trump decided to follow his rejection, then they began blaming Israel about the fantasy of all of this plan. I think that this is a tremendous achievement. If it was like that, it is a tremendous achievement of the Israeli intelligence community, the Mossad mainly. I think that it is a very complicated and very ambitious plan, but eventually, if the Americans would have remained with Israel, and if the Kurds that were trained by the Americans and the CIA provided and supplied weapons to the Kurds, if they would have continued with the plan, I believe that the probability for a regime change in Iran would have been much higher.
Look, we don't have all, there's a lot we don't know about the plan, and we don't even know if what we know is accurate. So it's hard to judge its feasibility. But there is a bigger issue here. One last question on this. I mean, there are those in Israel who say there are no moderates in the regime or no elements within the current regime that can be dealt with. But this plan seems to suggest, at least, that there are some in the Israel intelligence community, that there are people in the current regime that could at least moderate Iran's position. How do you assess that?
I believe that it is reasonable to assume that there are some moderate people, mainly those who are in a sort of an opposition to the current regime and to its extremism. The challenge is to find these people, to reach them, and to contact them, and to assure that they will be with you. And I don't have sufficient details about Ahmadinejad and how feasible it was, but it is not something which is not reasonable at all. There are many people in Iran that do not support this regime, and you know something, even people that came from the same regime. Even people that came from the same regime, they became to be more sober with the years, and they understand that this regime is a disaster for the Iranian people.
Right. I don't think many people would have predicted that Mahmoud Ahmadinejad would have been one of those people, but I guess stranger things have happened. I want to move out to the events currently happening now. The U.S. stepping up its strikes on Iran, now threatening, or apparently sort of indicating threats it may strike at Iran's nuclear facilities again at some time in the future. This is a very gradualist approach. Do you think there is a point that could succeed, in which Iran will back down on its attacks on the shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, anything short of a full-out U.S. Assault on Iran again?
Yes, I have no doubt about it, but it depends only on President Trump, only on the U.S. And we had, previous discussions, and I told you several times that I do not believe that the gaps between both sides are bridgeable, that I don't believe that this negotiation will lead eventually to a final status agreement, and I don't believe that this regime, the current Iranian regime, has the will and the capacity to reach to an agreement, and therefore the idea that the negotiation eventually collapsed is not something that should surprise people. The question now is what is going to be the response of President Trump. If eventually President Trump will decide that the only way to create a change and to realize its own objectives of war will be a regime change, then the U.S. is, of course, the U.S. can do the job, can accomplish the job with Israel, without Israel, and I think that it depends only on President Trump.
Right. Now, as I reported, Iran continues to strike out at its Gulf neighbors. There is concern in Israel, though, that at some point Iran could turn its targets again on Israel. I wonder if you think there is a specific point or level at which Iran is going to say, we're going to bring Israel back into this. For example, if the U.S. would, again, start striking specifically directly at, say, Iran's nuclear facilities.
It depends who will be the final decision maker at that point, because we are not talking about a coherent regime. We are talking about at least three factions that compete each other, and each faction tries to undermine all the things that are done by the other faction. And I don't know who will make the last call in this regard. I think that it will be a huge misperception, a huge strategic mistake of Iran if they will attack deliberately Israel without any provocation from Israel, from the Israeli side, because Israel will be forced to retaliate, and very aggressively, with the permission of President Trump or without the permission of President Trump. Because if Israel will not retaliate, it will be a very dramatic negative change in the strategic position of Israel here in the region, and mainly vis-a-vis Iran. And I think that if the Iranian will attack Israel, then Israel will retaliate very aggressively and will accomplish what it planned to accomplish in last June and in the last operation in April.
Right. Just last question. You say in Israel, without an Israeli provocation, does that include, for example, any Israeli actions in Lebanon against Hezbollah? Do you think at this point Iran would move to defend Hezbollah, or is it too tied down into its battle with the U.S.?
I don't think so. I think that Iran wants to connect Lebanon to the MOU, but now there is no MOU. It's not only a theoretical MOU. And Israel said from the first beginning, from the first moment, that it rejects it. And there is a very close coordination between Israel and the U.S. Now Israel respects the constraints that President Trump asked Israel to take upon itself. But if Hezbollah eventually will provoke and will violate the ceasefire agreement, then I think that Israel will retaliate. And I think that President Trump stopped believing in the Iranians, in their good faith, and therefore I'm not sure that he is very serious with regard to the MOU and the previous commitments of the American vis-a-vis the Iranians when it comes to Lebanon.
Well, he should. Perhaps, if he hasn't by now, he most likely never will. Professor Kobi Michael, as always, thank you for joining us on ILTV.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Let's shift focus now to the latest political news, especially the Knesset approving that controversial law enshrining Torah study as a fundamental value of Israel, a law that certainly members of the ultra-Orthodox Haredi community will help strengthen their desire to maintain draft and expand draft deferments from the IDF. And here to discuss that law and maybe the impact it might have on the upcoming elections is veteran political analyst Gil Hoffman. He's among other things, former political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post. Gil, thanks for joining us. Well, let's talk about this law. What is the real meaning and significance of it? I mean, it's just purely symbolic, or does it has some practical impact, either socially, or politically?
It's actually too soon to say, Kalev. The law used to be a lot longer. It had a lot of different. There were a lot of different attempts to use this to either make a statement or to take steps that were practical. And over time, they took more and more out of it until it was only one sentence long, basically saying that Torah is a value for the state of Israel, which is true. It always has been true. But the whole point is not what it says. The whole point is that it's a basic law, which means a constitutional level bill. And so that, because of that, when you take another bill to the Supreme Court and say it's problematic, like a bill that says you can't jail ultra-Orthodox draft evaders, but you can jail other draft evaders, then they can come say, well, this is a higher level law, a constitutional law. It says that Torah is a value for the state of Israel, and therefore maybe that's okay. So that was the whole point. And yet the Likud people say that it's only declarative, that it doesn't mean anything. Ultimately, it's the Supreme Court that will decide.
Certainly, the IDF chief of staff thinks it does mean something. Let's talk about the potential political impact, because it was kind of conspicuous. Prime Minister Netanyahu has supported this law. He did not actually come out to the Knesset to vote for it. A lot of discussion about how this may impact on the upcoming elections. Where do you see, if any, of the impact for him or potentially his main challenger, who now is the former IDF chief of staff, Gadi Eisenkot?
So Netanyahu took the time to go to the King David Hotel to take part in the meeting of the law committee of the Likud to get his reserved slots for his friends on the party list for the next election. He did not take the time to go across the street from the prime minister's office to the Knesset at around 10:30 at night to vote for this bill enshrining Torah study. He did make sure that there would be a majority in the room, which there was, despite Yuli Edelstein and my neighbor over here, Danny Luza, voting against it. But him not coming, I think, was very symbolic. That he's just doing this to throw the ultra-Orthodox a bone. He doesn't believe in it. He's doing this to keep the ultra-Orthodox in his bloc ahead of the election and ahead of the government formation that could happen afterward. He got a little scared of the Shas rabbis praising Gadi Eisenkot and maybe panicked a little bit and gave the ultra-Orthodox what they wanted so they can pretend they have an accomplishment for their constituency on the election day.
Right, but how much of an issue do you think this might have in a general election? Because at the end of the day, Israeli voting patterns tend to be very, at least in terms of party, tend to be quite stable, at least, for example, the support for the Likud and Prime Minister Netanyahu's support.
I think that's one of the things that makes this election fascinating, Kalev, being the first election after October 7th, where the people of Israel get their say in trying to make their own point post-October 7th. There might be people who say that the lack of service by the ultra-Orthodox is what bothers them the most and would make them vote for Eisenkot or for Lieberman or whoever, perhaps people who used to vote for Likud, and the amount of people who want to take that revenge could ultimately decide this election. Then again, the ultra-Orthodox, whenever they're the center of attention, that brings out the voters among them. A lot of them maybe would rather stay in their yeshivas and not bother going out to vote. But when they feel threatened, then they vote in greater numbers. And that could prevent, for instance, Shas from losing voters, the Sephardi voters, to Eisenkot, the first Moroccan candidate for prime minister, or to Ben-Gvir, who's Sephardi, younger and more charismatic.
Right. Gadi Eisenkot, I mean, it's kind of been a sort of meteoric rise. A lot of people would have said several months ago Naftali Bennett seemed to be the leading candidate. How do you account for it? By the way, I would say a lot of our foreign viewers here at ILTV probably have very little idea about Gadi Eisenkot. And I think a lot of Israelis, they certainly know him as a former chief of staff. I'm not even sure how certain they are about what his political views are or where he stands on the political map.
Well, Gadi's smart enough to not reveal that right now. During an election, the last thing you want to do is tell anyone your opinion about anything. If a candidate tells anyone their opinion about anything, other people might have other opinions, and then they won't vote for them. That's not smart politically, but at least in Israel. But Eisenkot studied at the Army College in Pennsylvania. He was part of the think tank of former Jerusalem Post editor David Makovsky in Washington. So he has his experience in America. And Makovsky told me that he was impressed by how much Eisenkot knows about things that have nothing to do with the IDF, about how well-rounded he is. And we'll be learning more and more about him. The world will be learning more and more about him, though the world is already starting to get it wrong. Reuters referred to him as a hawkish ex-general running against Netanyahu. If he's hawkish, then there are no legitimate candidates for prime minister in Israel in the eyes of the world's largest media outlet. So it doesn't maybe really matter who we vote for, right?
Right. Well, certainly the Likud campaign, which is already up and running, is trying to paint Gadi Eisenkot as belonging to the left. Gil, I don't have to tell you how many times I and maybe you have pronounced the political obituary for Prime Minister Netanyahu going into elections where it seems like his long reign as Israel's prime minister and political career may be coming to an end. He's again and again he's managed to pull it off one way or another. Where do you place this coming election in terms of the challenges he's faced over the years to keep hold of power?
It's much harder, obviously, because of October 7th. The victims of October 7th were in the south and the north, which is the base of Netanyahu's Likud party. If you lose a base, it's hard to win politically. But history shows that when you ask Israelis what the top issue they're going to vote on election eve, they say the economy. But then the exit polls, when you find out on what issue Israelis voted, it always ends up being security. And Netanyahu will be able to argue that security-wise, it's much better now than it was on October 6th. We're not being threatened by infiltrations from Gaza. We're in Gaza. We're not being threatened by infiltrations from Lebanon. We're in Lebanon. We're not being threatened by the Syrian army that's been destroyed by Israel. We're in Syria. And that will make a lot of people vote for Netanyahu anyway, even though they're very bitter at him. So no one can count him out. You're right. Kalev, we've written that obituary endless times for 30 years. And and if he passes the abolish death bill next Knesset, he could be around for hundreds of years. If he,
we'll have to end it there, and we'll have to see what happens. Gil Hoffman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kalev.
Now here's a message from one of our partners.
75 years ago, a bold idea helped build a nation. Since then, Israel Bonds has helped power growth, innovation, and resilience across Israel. Generation after generation, investors have turned values into action. Now, it's your turn to be a part of the next chapter. Celebrate 75 years of Israel Bonds. Invest today at israelbonds.com.
Israel bonds are always a good investment. Anyway, that ends this broadcast on ILTV. Continue watching us or go to our app. You just have to scan the QR code there on your screen. Stay tuned with us. I'm Kalev Ben David, and thank you for joining us here on ILTV.